Hi everybody, joining me today is the wonderful Margaret Kimberley, who is the editor of the Black Agenda report. Hi Margaret, how are you?
I'm good.
How's things over in America, Margaret? It's a bit of a quiet news day at the moment, isn't it? There's not much in the news at all, is there?
No, not much. People are panic buying everything. You can't find hand sanitizer or toilet paper, and plus they're trying to pick a new president. We have in my opinion, disaster going on now with the presidential election. So, and I also think it's something the media doesn't give much attention to, but I think the Trump administration are trying to start a war against Iran. They bombed Iraq, told the U.S. to get out of their country, but instead they're bringing new weapons in and using them to attack Iran. So that's something flying under the radar.
All right, we'll come to that. It is on my list of things that I want to talk to you about. Obviously, the first thing we're going to talk about is the coronavirus. This is a pandemic now. That the World Health Organization have called it a pandemic. We've just had another 10 deaths in this country, so we've gone from 10 deaths to over 20 in 24 hours. It's spreading like wildfire. The statistics that I've seen from the experts, there was an expert on Joe Rogan, I don't know whether you've seen it, and he gave some fantastic information out. It's 10 to 15 times worse than the flu. It acts like the flu, but it's not a flu strain. They're expecting around about 10 million hospitalizations over in America with 400,000 deaths. And Trump fired his entire pandemic team 2 years ago, didn't he? Tell me about that, Margaret. Tell me about what you think about the government's response to this epidemic.
Well, we are in a bad way. We have a president who's uniquely unqualified in general, but he's not very smart. He had no public policy experience, and he is also surrounded by people who are equally incompetent. So they don't think ahead about anything. This drive for austerity in the United States, which continues whether they're Republicans or Democrats in office, means that many things we need are being cut. And I'm sure that Trump, being who he is, or the people who advised him to do this, didn't think about it at all. And as he said at his news conference yesterday, he doesn't take responsibility for any. I mean, he actually said that in response to a question.
He blamed it on Obama, didn't he?
He blamed it on Obama, who has not been president for 3 years. I think you have like a 1-year grace period to blame things on a predecessor. I think 3 years out, you kind of gotta, whatever happens, you gotta own it. So we have this federal agency, the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC.
CDC, yeah.
Who decided not to use, I don't know why, not to use the diagnostic tests that the World Health Organization and the rest of the world use. So people have every symptom, have been to countries where the spread has been worse, have been in contact with infected people, and cannot get tested. So when you see that X number of people in the United States are infected, it's meaningless. We don't know.
Yeah, I heard a statistic saying there was somebody from, I think it was Ohio, an expert, it was some professional from Ohio, said that they think there's as many as 100,000 infected just in Ohio. I think it was Ohio. So we don't know how many people are going to have got this already, do we?
No, we have no idea. There are people who thankfully are exposed but do not become ill, depending on their health, depending on their age, all sorts of factors. But we have no idea how many people are infected. And, and Trump, even at his press conference yesterday, he's still shaking hands with people. Nobody's shaking hands. People aren't hugging, people aren't kissing, people are fist bumping, elbow bumping, just waving hello, everything except shaking hands. But he's shaking hands with people at this press conference where he should be demonstrating some kind of leadership, but he doesn't have it in him, so that's not going to happen.
I was in America. I've only been to America once. I spent about 3 months over there. In 2008 it was when Obama won the election in 2008. I was there and everybody was very hopeful and there was going to be change. yeah, it didn't quite work out that way. But I mean, the thing that really stood out to me 10 years ago, Margaret, was your healthcare system, or rather lack of it.
Yes.
We've got an NHS over here, as you no doubt know, and my mum was ill recently. She was taken care brilliantly. The NHS is wonderful. It's not like that in America. My friend had a serious illness, and he got cancer, and he had to basically go through, I think it was £100,000 or something like that. It was causing him. It was an underlying health problem, and then a few years ago he got cancer. And he was a person who was a great singer, Margaret. He's a fantastic singer. You know, sings at clubs and outdoor outings. Honestly, the guy is amazing. But it doesn't pay full time, and it doesn't pay enough to pay the bills. And he says it pays enough to pay the bills, but what it doesn't do is give me any healthcare coverage. I can't afford it. So he has to, this great singer has to take a job, and the job he took was in one of those, you know, those car body sprayers things where they have to wear a mask, and this great singer in that environment. And the only reason he does that, a 40-hour a week job, is just because it comes with health insurance, because you don't have a system over in America that cares for people. You have a system over in America that just makes money for certain people. How are you going to cope? How is America going to cope with this, with the healthcare system that you've got at the moment? I heard Nancy Pelosi the other day saying that the tests are going to be affordable. Can you shed any light on this? This is, this is...
Nobody knows. I mean, there are people who've already been tested and been charged a couple $1,000s. So first of all, the healthcare system depends on if you work full time, if you work someplace that gives you coverage. Of course, you're charged for it. It's not free. We do have the Medicare for people 65 and over. So seniors have coverage. The Medicaid system is for low-income people, but it's administered by the states. So here in New York, we get pretty good Medicaid coverage. In Texas, you would not get good. In fact, there are states where adults can't get Medicaid. I mean, in every state, kids can, but there are places where literally you cannot get it. So it's this, and even when you have insurance, people go broke when they get sick. I have a friend who had a cancer diagnosis a couple of years ago. He and his wife paid $1,500 a month for insurance. Then he gets cancer, and one test, a PET scan, they charged him $4,000. So, and he's broke. So now he's recovering from cancer by going on GoFundMe and getting people to help him out. So we don't have a healthcare. It's profit driven. Even Obamacare was really a bailout of big pharmaceutical companies and the big health insurance companies. They made a killing. So it's in the best of times, it doesn't work very well. Even with Obamacare, there are millions of people, they fall into this gray area. They're not poor enough for Medicaid, or they live in a state where it's not very accessible. And now we have this health crisis. I mean, there's always a health crisis. This has exposed things that always go on. People who can't get care or go into debt because they get sick. And now we have this communicable disease that is exposing what's already there. And these people are never discussed. They're never on the agenda. Our system exists by acting as though everything is fine and never talks about it. And now with this election, one of Bernie Sanders' signature proposals is Medicare for all, the system I just described that now covers all seniors. That everybody should have it, and the Democratic Party establishment does not want it. And Joe Biden, their favorite, said he would veto any bill that, if a Medicare for all bill passed in Congress.
It goes nicely onto what I wanted to talk about next, because you're in the middle of one of those, it's an election year for you over there, and I'm sure in November, whoever... as George Carlin said, whoever is elected, I'm sure your lives will improve immediately the next day. I'll come to Bernie Sanders in a minute, but he's running against Joe Biden. I'm really worried about this man, Margaret, and I'm really, honestly, I'm more worried about Joe Biden than I was about Trump in 2016. And I thought he would start World War III. I'm more worried about Joe Biden because This man he's clearly got some cognitive decline, hasn't he? What's your
Yes, he
take on
does.
this?
Well, there's clearly something wrong with him. He was never a very smart person. Obama chose him to be his running mate, mostly because he was a favorite of those in the establishment who still had questions about Obama. He was most definitely preferred by Zionists. He was always a big supporter of Israel. And so for that reason, this subpar individual, I mean, there's only, even when he didn't have cognitive decline, he was never very bright. And he's a right-wing Democrat also. He was always on the right. So his Obama choosing him was a way to shore up support from the more conservative elements in the Democratic Party. So now, based on that, he's running for president. I thought someone else would really, I thought Elizabeth Warren or somebody else would be the person who emerged to compete with Bernie Sanders at the end, but that's not what happened. And so this man who clearly needs help, he has a problem with anger. He gets into arguments with people. He called a woman a dog-faced pony soldier. It was the weirdest thing. I mean, it was like a crazy insult, but he said he got in an argument. This man in Michigan, blue-collar worker, asked him about gun rights, and that's,
Yeah.
you know, working class white people in that state, yeah, they would be gun owners. And instead of answering a question, which one could expect on the campaign trail, he blew up. He said he wanted to slap the man. He said we should step outside. I mean, it was just crazy.
Yeah.
And he clearly has some kind, in addition to his intellectual deficit, has some sort of problem. But we can see the power of propaganda, because the corporate media, the establishment, they all march in lockstep. So he blows up at this guy in Michigan, and they all say, well, it's a good thing. It shows he's strong. It was unbelievable to me. But that's what propaganda, and Americans don't like to think we have propaganda here, but of course we do. We're all indoctrinated. And so they cover for him. I don't know what they're going to do during the next debate. They don't want him to be interviewed one-on-one. And the fact that they're setting him up for this campaign and ultimately the presidency is just disgraceful.
Yeah, doesn't the establishment have all rallied around him? You saw before Super Tuesday, everybody dropped out and supporting him, and you know, just trying to all coalesce behind him. Them all coalescing behind him here because he was basically the only person they had left that they could support, especially after Bloomberg, you know, blew up and literally just blew up. His campaign started and stopped on Super Tuesday by the look of it. How desperate does it show that the establishment is, that they're coalescing and rallying around somebody who is quite simply, well, I think he's suffering from dementia. I mean, how desperate must they be to be doing this?
Well, they don't want, these people are determined, the ruling class, for lack of a better term, actually it is the perfect term, they do not want any change. Bernie Sanders returned to things we used to have. We used to have a minimum wage that went up incrementally on a regular basis. The healthcare system was not always as bad as it is now. The cost of college, all of these things are impacting millions of people, but they are determined that there will be no change. And they want to destroy not only his campaign, but they want to destroy any idea that there is going to be change that benefits the people. And so they are desperate because, and when they say Sanders can't win, I believe it's just the opposite. They know he can. And but they don't want that to happen.
They are terrified that he's going to. They're terrified, and that's why you're seeing all the knives out for him now. I mean, this is somebody... But Bernie Sanders is a man of the people. He's been saying the same things for the last 30, 40 years. And the thing that worries me is it's the angle that Jimmy Dore takes. You know, for 30 years, 40 years, he's been saying we need a rainbow coalition outside of the Democratic and Republican parties. And then he finally gets the chance to be president, and he's shepherding everybody into the party that his base rallies against. His base support is more independence, I would say. and he's going against his base. It is, Margaret, I don't know whether you followed the politics over here in the UK last year in the election, but it is eerily similar, his stances, to what Jeremy Corbyn was doing last year, trying to have one foot in and one foot out and trying to placate both sides. And what he's doing is he's alienating his own support here, isn't he? The same way that Corbyn did last year. And he needs to take the gloves off. You mentioned the debate there. Doesn't he need to take the gloves off in this debate if it goes ahead? I mean, it might be cancelled because of the coronavirus, but I mean, he needs to take the gloves off here and stop calling him his friend, doesn't he? And say, no, Joe, you're the enemy of the people.
Yeah, he needs to. He's been saying that too much. He made a terrible mistake when he was asked if he thought Biden could beat Trump, and he said yes. And he should have said, no, I'm the one who could beat Trump.
I know.
And trying to placate, and he didn't learn anything from 2016 when he was constantly asked, will you support Hillary if she gets, will you support her? And he said yes, and he did, and he actively campaigned for her. And now she claims that he never did it. I mean, talk about propaganda. He tried, Sanders went from attracting thousands of people, he was filling arenas. He couldn't fill a gymnasium when he campaigned for her because it wasn't, nobody wanted, people who wanted him, they wanted him. They didn't want Hillary Clinton. So it's going to be the same thing. Even if he did endorse and campaign for Biden, he wouldn't get credit for it. And if he lost, he'd still be blamed.
So it's what I've said, Margaret. I've said they're going to blame him no matter what he does. No matter what he does, he's going to get the blame. So why not do the right thing and do what you know you want to do deep down and what your base is going to love you for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he needs to stop praising Biden. Stop. If you're going to call him his friend, say, yes, Joe and I have been friends for years, but I am the person who could beat Trump. I am the one with the policies that people need and want. And the problem, I think, is, and I think this happened to Corbyn too, I think they're not prepared for the attacks. The attacks that come from the media, the propaganda against them. And for Corbyn, it was anti-Semitism. But I think what happens when these attacks begin, I don't know if people really believed Corbyn was an anti-Semite, but when there's this constant barrage of negativity, it seeps into people's heads. It's kind of like background music. You start to think, well, there's something wrong with this person. And then the same people keep saying he can't win. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The problem Sanders has also with Black voters who are overwhelmingly Democrats is that most Black voters are very risk averse and are most concerned about getting Republicans out of office, especially Trump. And that's even more true now because Trump is the Republican in office. And so are afraid to take a chance. And so when they're told over and over and over again, Sanders can't win, even though the issues he talks about are things they want, they will not support him.
Yeah, and they're voting against their own interests, aren't they?
Voting against their own interests because they see their overriding interest being getting Trump out of office.
Yeah, I mean, it was the same over here. We had people who were voting against their own interests because the whole thing was Brexit. That was the only thing that was on their minds, and obviously the reason it was the only thing on their minds is because that's what they've been told 24/7 for the last 2 years by the media. Aren't the Democrats here? I mean, they're trying to re-elect Trump, aren't they? We know that. I hate making predictions because I didn't write this stupid play. I don't know what's gonna go next, but it looks to me like they're actively trying to re-elect Trump just to stop Bernie Sanders being president. Because there's no way that Biden. I'll be surprised. I mean, can you imagine Donald Trump going Joe Biden? He would destroy him, wouldn't he?
Well, yeah, I think they hope. It's kind of weird wishful thinking. They, in their desperation, have convinced themselves if the propaganda is bad enough, or I guess good enough, depending on your point of view, that they can pull him over the finish line. So they want to win, but push comes to shove. If they have to choose between Sanders and Trump, they'll go with Trump.
They'll go with Trump.
They will, and they, whether intentionally or not, I think that will be the result if Biden is the one who gets the nomination. And even if Sanders actually can turn things around in these primaries coming up, and by the way, there are a lot of states left to vote. Here in New York, we haven't voted yet. Our primary is not till April.
Yeah.
So that's another kind of propaganda. Well, it's over with. So, you know, let's just shut this down and that's the end of it. No, millions of people haven't voted. But even if Sanders turns it around, I think they will destroy him, or they will try to go to the convention and pick someone else.
Yeah.
And they already started saying before Biden won his string of primaries, they were saying, well, the person who gets the most votes doesn't have to be the nominee. So they were actually telling people, well, forget what we ever told you about democracy. We didn't really mean it. So if Sanders turns things around, they will go to the convention and steal it from him.
Yeah, have you seen the exit polls? How off the exit polls are from the real?
Yeah, it's that's worrying. Well, that's another thing in this country. We don't want to talk about vote theft. We have a system where the states are allowed to come up with rules to keep certain people from voting, voter ID, and all, you know, there's something called cross-check. And if you, and it should be illegal. So, for example, if they say there's a Gordon Dimmack in New York and another Gordon Dimmack in New Jersey, they'll take you off the rolls and claim you were registered twice.
But they wouldn't do that to Gordon Dimmack. They would only do it if my name was, I don't know, Miguel Fernandez or something like that, because Gordon Dimmack is more likely to vote Republican, and obviously somebody from Latino that is a dissent is more likely to vote Democrat. So that's the way they did it. Greg Palast has done some fantastic work on interstate cross-check, hasn't he?
Yeah.
They're making a mockery here of not just in America, but we saw it over here. I saw it over here last year. They made a mockery of democracy, and they're doing it again in America, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. We need to stop talking about being a democracy, frankly, because first of all, we're an oligarchy.
Yeah.
And rich people call the shots. Their interests reign supreme. Rich people and corporations, the military-industrial complex, they decide what is going to happen in this country. And there have actually been studies done that show even when the person you vote for wins, you still don't get what you want.
Yeah.
So the fact that they let us vote every now and again that's not a democracy.
Yeah, I saw a statistic that it doesn't matter how popular a bill is or how unpopular a bill is, it doesn't matter. There's a 30% chance that it's going to go through. However, if there's a lot of money behind it, it goes up to like 80% chance of it's going through. I mean, that's not a democracy. That is an oligarchy. It's the very definition of it, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. And so, you know, we have this system that it's a failed state. That's what I said in my last column in Black Agenda Report. And I was talking about the coronavirus specifically, that if nothing shows we're a failed state, this does. Americans always calling ourselves an advanced country, you know, the leader of the free world, some such nonsense. And there's this pandemic and people can't get tested.
Yeah.
So we're not advanced, we're not a democracy, we're none of those things. We are a failed state, failing even as we speak, and we need to stop fooling ourselves and thinking that we have things that we don't have.
Yeah, this coronavirus, you mentioned it. Yeah, I should really tag it on to the end of the video when I cut this, but I was listening to a lot of experts yesterday. I've stopped listening to the media on this coronavirus. I've started to just listen directly to the experts. And one of the things that they said really increases the mortality rate with this coronavirus is obesity. And obesity is something that America struggles really badly with, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's we have the worst food in the world. You know, when I travel to other places, I'm like, oh, food's supposed to have a taste. You know, we have limited, and especially poor people have limited access to really good food, to fresh produce. People live on carbs. People live on junk food. There's a proliferation. That's the cheapest food in the country. The most affordable food is the worst food that we have. We have a car culture. Here in New York and some other places, it's slightly different. People do move around more, but in general, America is fat and getting fatter. And the quality of the food, the sedentary lives, it's the fact that the worst food is the cheapest. All of these things contribute to obesity.
Going back to your presidential race, which is going to change everything and make everybody's lives better as soon as somebody's picked. I mean, even if Bernie Sanders does get in, nothing really is going to fundamentally change, is it? Because he's going to push Medicare for all, and what's going to happen is the Republicans are going to block him, his opponents are going to block him, and his enemies are in his own party or in the Democratic Party. They're going to. So it's not like if he comes in, they're going to get Medicare for all. And my worry is with Bernie, because he's playing both sides and putting one foot in and one foot out, how long is it before he caves on Medicare for all and says, OK, we can only get the public option, which is what you should have had back in 2008 at the very minimum. This is really worrying me. But there is a third candidate, isn't there? That's Tulsi Gabbard. She doesn't get any coverage in the United States. Tell us why that is, Margaret.
Well, she speaks out. Her signature issue is war and trying to stop war. And they are not having it. They, Bernie Sanders' foreign policy is not left wing. It's another way that he skirts the issues. He voted against the Iraq War, but since then he doesn't come out against the terrible sanctions that are killing people, by the way, in Iran, one of the places hardest hit by the coronavirus. The United States makes it almost impossible for Iran to even import medicines. But Sanders doesn't say anything about that. When the Trump administration assassinated Soleimani, the Iranian general, all he said was, I don't think this is keeping America safe, not that it was a war crime. But she...
Venezuela as well.
Yes.
Venezuela as well. He confirmed the narrative with Venezuela first, saying that Maduro is an evil dictator and what have you, and it's... you're right, his foreign policy is not great.
No, it isn't. But Gabbard, she talks about ending regime change wars. And that makes her unacceptable. So she was allowed in the debates. And they always have rules. Now, they changed them completely for Bloomberg because he gave the Democratic National Committee money. There was a rule that said you had to have a certain number of contributors in order to be allowed in the debate. He gave them cash and they said, oh, rule? What rule? We didn't have a rule. Now they're saying if you've won delegates. Now, she did win a couple of delegates in the faraway territory of American Samoa, but she did. And now they're saying she can't be in the debate. So they're making sure that she cannot be heard, that political, that policy point cannot be discussed. Bernie's not going to talk about it. Biden sure as hell isn't going to talk about it. And they're making sure that the only person who is talking about it will not be allowed to participate in the debates and therefore get attention from voters.
Yeah, there was. You mentioned she got some delegates, so she reached the threshold of getting on the debate because you need delegates, a certain amount of people donating to your campaign as well, and she's reached them all. And then they changed that threshold afterwards. Am I right in saying the last time the Democratic Party did something like that, it was Dennis Kucinich, who was also anti-war?
He was anti-war. I'm not sure. I can't swear to what the rules were at the time, but they do it on a whim. They change the rules. If there's somebody they don't want to hear from, if there's somebody they don't want to be heard, they come up with another rule.
Now she's anti-regime change war is what she said. She's a hawk on terror and a dove on peace. Yeah. That's what she said. And obviously, they don't want her on the debates. I say it's obvious. It is obvious because they don't want her highlighting United States' foreign policy. I believe at the moment you're bombing 8 countries, the Americans, the USA is, and that's just what we know of. I think it's 7 or 8. Most Americans don't even know that, do they?
Oh, no. People didn't know that there are U.S. troops in Syria, for example. And and that all started with Obama. That's Obama's war. Nobody said anything. So it's something people weren't aware of. I don't think most Americans know that the Iraqi parliament voted for the U.S. to get the hell out of their country once and for all. A couple
We're
years
going
ago,
there for democracy, Margaret. We went in there to plant the seed of democracy. I remember George Bush telling, "There's a seed of democracy, and they've got a parliament now, and they've got democracy, and they voted to make America leave." And America's response, I can't believe this, but was a letter from Pompeo that said, "We're a force for good." That's what they said, and that was their excuse. 117-0. They said, get out of our country, this democratic country. And America said no. And obviously we're in there as well. We just had a medic die in Iraq. I mean, why are we still in Iraq 20 years later? Can anybody explain this?
Well, the word's imperialism. And people sneer and, when you say things like that, but that's what it is. And so the U.S. and NATO, the other NATO partners, are committed to staying in these countries. But it's something that gets very little attention in the media. You have people, even as I said, like Sanders, who are maybe on the left on domestic policies, who cave and give in. So most people don't even know that the United States has a policy of killing people in Iran and Venezuela and other countries that are sanctioned. I mean, that's all it is. There's no other way to describe it. But even members of Congress I don't know if they pretend ignorance or they really are. A couple of years ago, some soldiers were killed in Africa, in Niger, and their members of Congress were like, I didn't know we had troops in Niger.
Yeah,
there are American bases all over Africa.
I think
and Trump wants to bring them home, but the Democrats are opposed to it. So the duopoly is pro-imperialism.
Yeah, I heard somebody say, I don't know how true this is, but I heard somebody say of all the countries in Africa, there's only 2 countries that America hasn't got troops in or hasn't got some sort of influence in, and that's Africa. I mean, the average person on the street in America wouldn't have a clue that this is happening, because if you listen to the media, it's not.
Yeah, it's that's the U.S. Africa Command. It's called AFRICOM. Unbeknownst to most people on the planet, the U.S. military has divvied up the world into there's a Southcom and a CENTCOM. And
Margaret, honestly, I've down here, right? I'm sorry to cut you off, but honestly, the next thing on my little list here, this is why I think you're every time you go to say something, whenever I've heard you something, I thought that's exactly what. Because right down here, I've got the scariest picture I have seen since I've started doing this and really opened my eyes in the last 4 years. Is that picture of the world with AFRICOM and CENTCOM and all that. That's the scariest picture, because I look at that and I think, what kind of construct does that and looks at the world in military agendas? It's a Nazi Hydra. That's what looks at the world in that angle, isn't it? It's scary.
Yeah, it's fascist. It's it's so funny. When Trump started running and everybody started screaming, he's a fascist, and I'm not saying he is not, but we had it before. He just, he does not bother to smooth out the rough edges or anything, but he's not brought us, I'm not going to say there aren't any differences, but we had imperialism, which is one of the signature elements of fascism, even before he came in. And so we have a ruling class that is determined not to have that change. That's why they want to spy on us. That's why they have to destroy Bernie Sanders. Even a little bit of liberalish reforms are not going to be allowed.
Increased censorship.
Yes, censorship, no health care, the so-called gig economy. All of these things are meant for us. It's the race to the bottom. And we are supposed to accept living at the bottom while simultaneously believing we're the greatest country in the world. Americans always say that. It makes me crazy. I hate it. But yeah, that's what we have. It is a Hydra-headed beast. And there's a term I'm blanking on, full spectrum dominance. That's what I was. And that's what they're trying to achieve. And that's why they have to keep Julian Assange in jail. It's why they do so many things. They are terrified that we will in any way oppose what they do.
Trump has obviously, and America have been in this trade war with China for years now, and now he's in a trade war. It's moved on to Europe, and I even heard that he was going to sanction us in the UK the other day. Because of his trade war. This trade war everybody's been saying it's risky, and we've obviously got a pandemic at the moment that is going to grip the world by the look of it in the next 12 months, certainly in the next 6. And I found a lovely statistic that the United States, 100% of its medications come from abroad, basically. 100% of the chain, anyway, comes from abroad. This is really scary, this trade war, and I know Tulsi Gabbard has been warning about this, that it's going to turn into a hot war if we carry on. How worried are you that it's going to turn into a hot war, Margaret? Because I know I am.
I am also. It's very frightening to me. I mentioned briefly this bombing in Iraq, and they have. It's so funny how talk about propaganda. The Trump administration, anything that happens in Iraq is Iran's fault. So any American soldier killed in Iraq was actually killed by Iran. Now it's that's their motive for not leaving Iraq. It's their motive for constantly attacking Iran. Last year it was they got your country to keep an oil tanker from leaving Gibraltar. I mean,
Trump turned our Royal Navy into pirates. He turned them into pirates. We literally went and stole their shit. Just stole it.
Exactly. And European countries, it really, for all their complaining about Trump as a person, they treat him like every other American president and do exactly what he wants. But all of these things point to the risk of a hot war. And the assassination of Soleimani was very frightening to me. The trade war is part of it. China is, if not, I believe is going to be the world's biggest economy.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
And they have formed this strategic alliance with Russia. Eurasian integration is a fact. And all of these things point to a threat to America's economic and military prowess.
Yeah.
And I believe they're going to reach the point where they say the only way to do it is to have a war. And we're talking about nuclear powers, mind you. And the Trump administration has thrown out every agreement that the U.S. had with Russia. These agreements went back to the days of Reagan and Gorbachev. Yeah. And it seems to me, and we have these people who every now and again, someone will say, well, we could have a limited nuclear war. And it's something that nobody talks about. Nobody talks about nukes anymore. And I don't know how many seconds it is to midnight now, but it is something that, to pay attention to. There is always a risk. And we have a dumbed down populace, the corporate media. And that's another thing about Trump. Even the supposedly liberal corporate media like the New York Times, when push comes to shove, when there's any military action abroad, they support him. And I'm sure they supported Bush's invasion of Iraq.
Not only that, but they support him, and when he doesn't enough, they attack him from the right as well, don't they?
Yes, they do. They do. So it's quite terrible. But yes, to answer your question, I am afraid of a hot war.
How much blame do you apportion to the media in the United States for the mess we're in at the moment? Because I've seen over here, our media over here it's it drives me mad. You've probably seen me shouting and screaming at the TV monitor because, I mean, especially last year, I couldn't believe the nonsense that they were spewing out. It's propaganda 24/7, and let's come to the worst thing with the media is that they are bringing about their own downfall. For instance, there was a piece of great news a couple of days ago, and I'm sure you were as happy as I was. Honestly, I almost cried when I heard Chelsea Manning had been freed and they disbanded the grand jury. Their treatment not only their silence on Chelsea Manning, but their silence on Julian Assange, not just for the last 2 years, but for the last decade, has been unforgivable, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And Chelsea Manning was freed the other day. What do you think this does this bode well for Assange? Obviously, with the grand jury being disbanded or disbarred or closed or whatever it is. What next for him? Because they are obviously trying to kill him, as they were trying to with Chelsea Manning, aren't they?
Oh, they are. I think they hope he does die. I mean, Chelsea Manning attempted suicide a couple of days ago. And that act may have actually freed her in a strange way. I'm not advocating people in prison try to kill themselves.
I mean, she would rather kill herself than testify. I mean,
exactly. I mean, it was such courage to have. I mean, let's talk about what she did. She told the world about U.S. war crimes in Iraq, gave the photographic evidence of the horrors that the U.S. had unleashed on that country. And from that moment on, she was marked. She was caught because she trusted someone and revealed herself to someone.
Who is now dead.
Yes, I wasn't sad when I got to be honest.
Committed suicide, I believe.
Yes, he was a young person, late 30s, but I was like, oh, well. Anyway.
Not Novichok, nothing like that.
Oh, my God. Can we talk about it? Where are the Scribbles? Where are they?
Oh, don't start, Margaret. Don't start. You can't ask that question. You ask that question, you go to the back of the line. Nobody gets to ask where the Scribbles are. We don't know.
And
we don't know.
Tell me what a D notice is.
Well, a D notice is it used to be called a DSMA notice, a Defence Advisory Notice. And this is an advisory notice from the government to say, don't talk about that in the media because, it'll be bad for our defence. And there are instances where these work, and they're a good thing. For instance, there was a D notice on the media in this country reporting on how our troops in Iraq were avoiding roadside bombs. That's a good thing. You don't want the opposition knowing how we're avoiding their tactics. But there was also D notice on when the Skripals were poisoned, as you would know, there was a D notice immediately within 24 hours, I think, on the media mentioning the name Pablo Miller or Orbis Business Intelligence. This is curious, isn't it? Do you know anything about Orbis Business Intelligence, Margaret?
I do. British intelligence is playing quite a role in so many of the things we've been discussing. First of all, I guess they hope we're stupid. It was like, I remember, so Putin was they're about to start the World Cup. He's trying to put on a show for the world. So he's going to kill a spy that he traded 10 years ago.
With a Russian-sounding nerve agent. Come on. James Le Mesurier fell out of a window. He's the head of the White Helmets. I'm not saying anything, but he fell out the window. Why is it whenever there's a Russian person, anything connected with Russia, you just know it's Russia? It's either polonium or it's Novichok.
Well, Mesurier. How do you pronounce his name? Mesurier.
James Le Mesurier. He's the guy who founded the White Helmets.
Yes, a construct of British intelligence, and there's so much we could talk about, but I do want to mention the OPCW whistleblowers, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and these brave people who've come forward to say not only were there no chemical weapons attacks in Douma, Syria, but there were dead people. That means people were killed for show and were killed in order to help start a war. And this gentleman who's now dead, I don't know. Well, I'm sure once it came out, they had to get rid of him because he knew or he orchestrated people being killed. I mean, that's the
theory. I don't know whether this White Helmets, I don't know whether it was set up with the best intentions or whether it was something that then went bad or was set up for nefarious intentions. But what I do know is It's not the saintly organisation that we've been told, and it's not the saintly organisation that deserved a bloody Oscar. Because some of these people, you know, when you actually hear the reports from Syrians themselves, from on the ground Syrian people, they will say to you, no, they're with the terrorists. And then when we saw the liberation of Aleppo, I mean, you know, I've seen the footage. The White Helmets base is right next door to the Al Nusra headquarters in you know, they're working hand in glove. So you've got to ask, what the hell is going on over there? I mean, you know, Operation Timber Sycamore is something that you'll be aware of, that our media seemingly have never heard of. We've been trying to overthrow the government of Assad for 7 years, and all of these things, it looks like, it's all circulating around this OPCW, the White Helmets, Pablo Miller, the Christopher Steele, Orbis Business Intelligence, all of these things. It all seems as if they're all based around the same.
They're related. They're all related to Russiagate.
Yeah.
You know, Hillary Clinton, her connections with U.S. intelligence, they were spying on Trump, and I think that is the root of the Russiagate, which is a tremendous fraud. They use that against Bernie Sanders. You know, Russia wants him to win.
And he played into it.
I just, you know, I was talking about how, you know, I'm against Putin, and I'm like, dude, come on. But yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot your question. I
was saying how they all do seem to be, it all does seem to be centered around Russiagate. You're right, because I mean, you know, Pablo Miller was the man who allegedly, Christopher Steele was the guy who apparently put together this P dossier that started the Russiagate thing off back in 2017, when BuzzFeed published it when everybody else wouldn't touch it. And then obviously he was the handler, I believe, of Sergei Skripal, former MI6 guy. You know, there's obviously some sort of story here that we're not aware of, and certainly the media are just staying well clear of it. And also, I might add, you mentioned the great people who are releasing stuff about what happened with the OPCW. They're attacking anybody telling the truth as well, and it's despicable, that is. What do you think's happened here? Because I've been trying to get my head around it, and it seems like that there has been a false flag in Syria of some kind. We don't know who's done it and why we've gone with this narrative, but it certainly seems like they're covering up for something, because these people died, and they died somehow and were then moved, by the look of it, to this place, and then this whole construct happened. What do you think has happened with all this, and how it connects with Russiagate?
Well, I think Russiagate is an invention of Hillary Clinton started it. Because she's so stupid and such a stupid politician, and instead of just being Secretary of State, she decides to help her husband, this Bill Clinton Foundation, and using her private email server instead of the State Department server, which means you're hiding something. And I think she spent most of 2016 worried about her legal troubles. And so she decided to create dirt on Trump because her dirt was going to come out. And so these people, the Christopher Steeles and this Professor Mifsud and people in British intelligence who were involved in spying on these low-level people in Trump's campaign to try to connect them with Trump. All of these, the Australian, who's the Australian guy who entrapped
Alexander Downer?
Yeah. So that's the origin of Russiagate. And then Trump wins. And they also did it because they didn't trust him. Trump was, during the campaign, he was saying things that were very disturbing to the surveillance state. He was talking about opposing regime change wars. He didn't mean it. He was talking about opposing trade deals. He didn't really mean it, but they didn't know that, and they couldn't trust that he was not going to, in fact, do the same thing other presidents did. And that's why they wanted to have dirt on him. And And of course, Russiagate's very useful every time they want to stop Bernie Sanders. So suddenly they say Russia wants him to win. And then they walked it back a couple of days later and said, well, actually, it was kind of overstated. But then the damage is done, especially when he
I find it hilarious that they'll do that. I mean, Bernie came out and said, "Stop it up, just back it up, Putin," and played into the narrative. And then you've got Donald Trump making a tweet saying, "Well, they're my intelligence services, and none of my intelligence services are saying that they're trying to prop up Bernie Sanders. So why aren't they telling me? Why are they telling the press and not me?" So you can, it makes Trump look good, doesn't it?
It did. I couldn't believe Trump made more sense than Bernie Sanders did. So we talked about the fact that neither of our countries are really democracies.
No.
And you see it if you pay just a little bit of attention, you see what they do. We have a surveillance state that is spying on all of us all the time, that if WikiLeaks shows us what U.S. troops are doing in Iraq, they make Julian Assange a marked man, and they claim he's a rapist, and which he's not. And Sweden said he was not from the very beginning, but they try to destroy his character first, then force him into hiding, then make sure that Ecuador goes back on its own laws to allow him to be snatched. And your country, they're not following their own rules about extradition.
Nope.
I mean, and people who are who should recuse themselves are making the decision about this extradition, and the charges against him are completely bogus. The charges here, the fact that there was a secret grand jury meeting to indict him is something most people did not know. But we have a ruling class of rich people and corporations who decide what happens, and they work hand in hand with CIA or MI6 in your country to make sure that they get their way.
And then with another one of the big stories, you're just leading off from that, making sure that you get your way. Obviously, the way they do it, I think, is with leverage over people. And I think this is where Epstein comes in, or the Epstein saga comes in, because this is somebody who has obviously been leveraging people around the world to do whatever intelligence agencies he's working for want. I would say that, because I think the jury's out now as to who exactly he was working for, this Epstein fellow, isn't it?
Mossad. I mean, that I'm sure they've got partners around the world, but I believe he was very wealthy, but nobody knew the source of his wealth. And I'm like, come on, he was set up by Mossad. And everybody from Donald Trump to Bill Clinton to Prince Andrew to who am I leaving out was compromised by him. And so that made him a very powerful person. And that meant he couldn't live to go on trial. They couldn't take the risk of him talking.
No, I mean, this one of these, he had on his island at the end, on its own, there was a building, wasn't there, with a gold dome. And apparently the only thing in this building was mattresses and cameras. And it was painted in the flag of Israel. I heard somebody say, no, it's not Israel flag, it's Greece.
What?
It's the colours of it's the colours of the Greece flag, not Israel. It was pretty obvious. I mean, what do you say about the subservience of America? Because obviously Trump is a big Netanyahu buddy. There's subservience to Israel. Is it 3.8 billion you're sending a year for their defence over 10 years? And that was Obama who set up that deal. What do you say about it? Because obviously over here, we're just as subservient to Israel as well, especially if you're in the Labour Party, it seems, because, I mean, they seem to be doing Israel's. But what do you say to it over there? That, the way that you are basically, it's all, I mean, Netanyahu basically can come over and just address your Senate without the president even knowing, can't he?
Yes, he can. He does whatever he wants to do. We have a system that's set up to make sure that there is complete compliance with support of Israel. Elected officials here in New York City, we have local elected officials, not members of Congress, city council members, members of the New York State legislature who regularly make trips to Israel. They're all invited to Israel and none of them say no because of people with money. And then of course you're called an anti-Semite, but people who are Zionists, they are very serious about defending Israel, and they use everything they can, legally, and I think skirting legality too, to make sure that any elected official who steps out of line suddenly faces a well-funded opponent. And that is the way things work in this country. So yes, Netanyahu, the Republicans could invite Netanyahu because Obama did one of the few good things, I think, the so-called nuclear deal with Iran. But Obama had an iftar, an Eid dinner at the White House, and invited the Israeli ambassador, and he was the first person to speak. And it was the most bizarre thing. So anyway, it's I'm not remembering the story very well, but from the bottom of electoral politics all the way to the top, everybody knows that they have to back Israel or just be silent about it and not say anything. Anybody who opposes Israeli policy is done for. The corporate media do it. People censor themselves. There's a man who lost his job at a university, Stephen Saleta. He is a Palestinian American, and when Israel was massacring people in Gaza, he tweeted about it a lot. They took the man's job. They have also made sure he never worked in academia again. He cannot he ultimately settled, got damages, but they make sure he never, ever works in academia again. And so everybody gets the message, and people toe the line out of fear.
Yeah, there was a CNN reporter as well who did a speech. I think it was at the United Nations. He did the speech, and in the speech he said, we need to free Palestine from the river to the sea, and they sacked him.
CNN Mark Lamont Hill. Yeah, he was a commentator. He was gone.
I mean, it's out in the open. Can you see this ever changing, Margaret?
A lot of other things would have to change first. We would have to have something really revolutionary happen in order for that to happen, because we're talking about very powerful people. We're talking about people who use their money to silence, and it's a part of a bigger problem where money talks, where lobbies, the Israeli lobby is, in a way, it's not unique. We have a lobby that makes sure our prescription drugs aren't subsidized. We have lobbies who make sure we don't have the regulations that would help us. We have lobbies that make sure that they keep getting their way. So it could not be an attack just on this lobby, but on the very foundation, the very nature of the way our system runs. And we need people to show some courage and not just give in, because Corbyn lost anyway, and Bernie Sanders could lose anyway, and somebody's got to say I'm going to do this, and it's ride or die, because then we have people, and then you're just a chump. So Corbyn, turns out, he's just a chump who's not the prime minister.
He drove me insane last year. He drove me mad. Everything that he stood for his whole career. His whole career, he has stood up for the rights of Palestinian Arabs. His whole career, he stood up for the rights of Palestinian Arabs against what he feels is a crushing illegal occupation of a nuclear-armed country. And he's right. And then he finally gets to power, and they hit him with this anti-Semitism question: are you an anti-Semite? And it's so easy, Margaret, to knock that out of the park at the first. It's so easy to hit that ball so hard. The media don't ever ask you it again, because you just say something like, I don't know. Well, this is a trick. No, I'm not an anti-Semite, and I'll tell you what, it's a trick. That you're trying to deflect away from the fact that I'm standing up for Palestinian Arabs, who, by the way, are Semites. So if you want to talk about anti-Semitism, let's talk about the anti-Semitic treatment of those Semites by Zionists. He says that once. The first time they ask that question, he says it once. And I guarantee you, they won't even let him finish the answer. They are cutting him off right there, because they know then, if they ask him again, he's going to say, well, look at all these crimes that Israel are committing against Palestine. Look at all what they're doing here. Look at how they're infiltrating our politics over here with the grassroots. Look at the astroturfing they're doing. Look at how, members of my own party have been offered junkets over in Israel, and then, Joan Ryan I'm talking about. He says that, and they never, ever ask him that question again, do they? And what does he do instead? Instead of taking that, I'd say it's like in football. The goal is out. The winger's crossed it to him. He's a yard out. All he's got to do is tap the ball in. And instead of what he's tried to do is dribble it around 7 people, do some keepy-uppy, and then an overhead kick from 40 yards away, trying to say this ridiculous. I oppose racism in all forms. Now I'm sure he was trying to say what Israel are doing against Palestine is racist, but nobody made that connection. And I worry that Bernie Sanders is doing exactly the same thing now, because what he's doing is, for 40 years, he's been saying we need to have a rainbow coalition outside of the major 2 parties to have any chance of changing anything. And what's he doing now? He's placating one of the very parties that he knows is the problem, saying saying about somebody who is quite literally the poster child of everything that has been wrong in American politics for the last 30 years. When you look at Joe Biden's record and the fact that he's not left at all, he's a Republican if you look at his voting record. And he's saying, I like Joe. Joe's a friend of mine. Joe's a good guy. I think he can beat Trump. What are you talking about? You're saying you think he can beat Trump? This is... I'm sorry, Margaret. I went on a bit of a rant there, but it was so frustrating to see this last year, and I can see it happening again in America. Can you see any good outcome at the end of this?
Not if he keeps doing that. No, he's got to say, I might lose, but I'm going to go down fighting, and he might win. But I think also this problem with Corbyn first and now Sanders is we have got to talk about. It's a conspiracy, and we have to talk about it. They can't be the ones to talk about it, but we have to be upfront about the propaganda, about these connections between the ruling classes and the surveillance state, and the fact that when they think Bernie Sanders can win a primary, they suddenly start connecting him with Russia, and they all go along. We have to acknowledge this indoctrination. We have to acknowledge that these people and these forces are trying to control the narrative, and therefore control our choices and control our lives. We have to say it. How do you fight against that? That's an interesting question, because that's why they don't do it, because it's relentless. It's relentless. The people attacking Corbyn, the people in your country, Piers Robinson, Vanessa Beeley, and others, that suddenly they were attacked, they were smeared. They're all Assad apologists. All they do is tell the truth about Syria. They can't get venues to talk anymore. And it happened in Vanessa Beeley was in Canada. They had to change venues. These same, and that's nothing but the surveillance state. There aren't people sitting around wondering if Vanessa Beeley is giving a speech in Toronto. And then, so that means we have to tell the truth about our countries, that they're not democracies, that we are living under the rule of rich people and their friends in government. And then we can have change, but we've got to be honest about what we're facing. And the electoral system, these people are not playing around. They're not going to just sit around and let Corbyn win, or let Bernie Sanders win. And if you don't talk about it, it's definitely not going to change. So I think we need to find the way to talk about what is obvious, what we have seen play out in more than one country for a long time. Yeah,
I think the internet has really helped with that, Margaret. My fiance says they can't put this genie back in the bottle. The internet has really, we've got the answers to anything that we want at our fingertips now, and people are getting more and more informed, who are, over the last 20 years since the boom of the internet. All of this truth is out there, and all of the facts are out there with regards to US imperialism and what the UK are doing around the world. I mean, what we're doing in the Chagos Islands is just horrific. I haven't even covered that in one of my videos yet. The truth is coming out, and this is what they're trying to stop, because this truth is throwing a bloody big monkey wrench in their whole operation. It's, people are starting to, as you say, tell the truth. They start to be more active. They start to be louder on Twitter and what have you. And the answer from the establishment so far has not been to listen to them and say, hold on, we better change our ways. Their answer is to be, well, let's silence them instead with crushing censorship. How far do you think this will go with regards to the censorship, or is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Because, I mean, I was talking to Piers Robinson not long, it was a few weeks ago, I had an interview with him, and he was saying, you know, we're in wartime. This is wartime, and you see this crushing censorship during wartime. I made that. Do you think that this censorship will be lifted in, as we move past this phase, or do you think it's going to get worse? My feeling is they're going to try and really clamp down on the censorship to try and stop these truths getting out.
I'm afraid I think it's going to get worse. That's why they make an example of Julian Assange. It's like, and just in case anybody had any idea that they were going to reveal things we don't want revealed, just ask yourself if you want to be facing decades in prison in a supermax prison in the United States.
It's a message.
It is, absolutely. And that's the use of Russiagate as well. That you control the narrative. I mean, they use Russia as the enemy, but they shortly after the election in 2016, there was this mysterious group, Propaganda or Not, and they developed this list of sites that they said were under Russian influence. Black Agenda.
According to, was it the Washington Post? According to the Washington Post, I mean, it was like this organisation they are the Bible on who is a good actor and who is a bad actor, and they sprang up from nowhere, didn't they?
Well, it tells you that it was the Washington Post. I mean, it was, absolutely. I mean, it only appeared in the Washington Post because Proper Not is the Washington Post. Yeah. Jeff Bezos. And I mean, talk about a lack of democracy. The richest man in the world owns one of the most influential newspapers in the country, the paper that covers the U.S. government. And we used to, and just briefly, we used to have more media. Media consolidation is encouraged a lot of censorship. It was Bill Clinton. There used to be regulations on media consolidation. You could not
Telecommunications Act, wasn't it?
Yeah, you couldn't own a newspaper and a TV station in the same city, for example. Clinton got rid of that. Now there are 6 media companies that control everything we see and hear in the United States. Just 6. And that means we can't have democracy. If you have all the information in the hands of a handful of people, and as far as the internet is concerned, they are not going to just sit around and let us say what we want to say. So then you have to have an integrity initiative. You have to have people being smeared. You have to have people being discredited because they cannot risk us being able to communicate freely.
They certainly can't. Julian Assange wrote to me, and in his letter he ended with the words, ultimately, truth ultimately is all we have. If we lose that, we're done for. Because if the I mean, this is my opinion, I don't know how you feel about that. If we allow the CIA and FBI and GCHQ to have the keys to the bowels of history, to writing history, then the future is just going to be totally false. Nothing is going to be true, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, things disappearing from the internet. I mean, it's gone.
Philip Cross on Wikipedia editing it. You know, this is Philip Cross is, for those of you who don't know, it's something that somebody who has been editing Wikipedia, I think like 18 hours a day non-stop for the last 10 years. And it's always Vanessa Beeley's page on Wikipedia is just, I mean, you look down the edits, it's just Philip Cross. And this looks to me like it's some sort of, I don't know, it's a computer program, artificial intelligence, if you want, that's collating information from from establishment media figures in the media and online, and that's how they're editing or stealth editing, you know, people like Vanessa Beeley's page. It's changing the truth, and if we don't know what the truth is, how the hell can we do anything about what they're doing to us and the crushing oppression that we're facing and the erosion of human rights and civil liberties and press freedom and freedom of speech, etc. If we don't know what the truth is, how can we fight back against it?
It's very difficult. It's very troubling. I have found, I've said many times, unless you are a news junkie who likes the internet, who knows who to follow on social media, you have no idea what's going on in the country. And the fact that you have to be a subset of a subset of a subset in order to know anything is just disgraceful. So people, the other thing that's dangerous is people who think they're well informed are being lied to. So there are people who, Americans, they read the New York Times or they listen to NPR or CNN or MSNBC, and they think they're well informed because they get news information from these sources, but they don't know anything. And that is also very troubling. Yeah. So what it does is it makes us look crazy or like liars. So if I say there's no proof that Assad ever used chemical weapons against his own people, people look at you like you're crazy because they've never heard that before. Everything they've heard is just the opposite. So Julian Assange, I'm a contributor to the recent book In Defense of Julian Assange. My chapter is called The Naivete of Julian Assange. And I argue he didn't know what he was getting into when he took those documents, accepted the documents from the DNC. And no, he didn't hack in. Nobody hacked the DNC. But anyway, so we have this system now where, so Assange gets blamed for Donald Trump's loss. So most people who are liberals, who ordinarily would be his defenders, don't care about him or even hate him because it's his fault that Donald Trump won. That's the kind of thing they do. And so when you and I say anything different, we're just crazy people to them.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. So they can silence us. So even if we can speak, nobody wants to hear us.
I would rather have a chat with somebody who is uninformed than somebody who is misinformed. The chats with misinformed people are always way more difficult than the chats with people who are uninformed, because people can be really dogmatic in the way they think, and all I care about is the truth, Margaret. That's really all I care about. I've not got a bias one way or the other. I tend to go left more than right, but honestly I just look at that whole left-right paradigm now and just think, really, I think that was invented to just to divide us and keep us fighting amongst ourselves while the 1% take all our rights and all the money with them. I forgot why I was making that point, but yeah, that's basically what I think. I want to get on to something else, Margaret. Lastly, this is we've covered a lot of topics, but I want to talk about this stock market crash that we're in the middle of. I shouldn't laugh, because when it crashes, the poor and the middle class are going to be the ones that suffer, and it is going to crash. And 2 days ago, Trump was on Twitter today saying today was the best rise in the stock market ever. And I retweeted it and just said what he didn't tell you was the day before they put $1.5 trillion into the system to make it do that. $1.5 trillion. I looked at it and I think free college was going to be something like 47 billion. And ending homelessness in the United States completely was going to be 20 billion. So that's 67 billion. You could pay for that and wipe out student debt and it not cost much more. 1.5 trillion is how much student debt. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Margaret, but every time somebody talks about, cancelling student debt, or I don't know, having a medical system, how are you going to pay for that is the question from the media. Nobody asked that question, did they, Margaret? Nobody.
No. No. And this is something that has been going on for a long time. The system is being held up with rubber bands and glue, or something crazy. They have been pouring money.
No. What it's being held up by, Margaret, is ignorance and wishful thinking. That's what it's being held up by.
And it's, first of all, the 2008 crisis never ended. No. And it's been, it's like the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dike and holes appearing. And that's been happening ever since 2008. And this injecting these trillions of dollars to prop up a system that's falling apart. It is going to be a disaster. It's going to be like the Great Depression all over. And that's another reason I think they're willing to start a hot war.
Yeah.
And people don't know anything about that. But it's all very, very, very frightening to me.
Yeah, we're in the middle of a pandemic. They've just put 1.5 trillion into the stock market because, you know, they can't let the stock market crash. Can't let it crash. Meanwhile, Trump has said during this period he'll forgive interest on student loans. Not the student loans that they could have paid off with this 1.5 trillion and forgave, just the interest. So you've still got to pay your student loans, but you don't have to pay the interest for the next few months. That's what they've said. That 1.5 trillion, that's, so just for the people watching this, 1.5 trillion, that's 1,500 million suitcases, all with $1 million in. Okay? 1.5 million suitcases, all with $1 million in. That's how much 1.5 trillion is. You could give every man, woman and child $4,250 in America, something like that, for that money. Now, at this time when people are going to be at home, self-isolating, and they can't make money and they can't make ends meet and they can't buy food, $4,250 would go a hell of a long way over these next few months. Isn't it interesting that if I was to suggest that on Fox, MSNBC or CNN, they would look at me like my head had just exploded, yet they put it into the stock market like that. There was no decision. There was nobody saying, can we afford this? There was nobody saying, can we have a vote? Can we do a bill through Congress? Nothing. They just printed it and put it in because the stock market is more important than people's lives. That's what it seems to me.
Well, they don't care about our lives.
No.
It's a system they want to prop up. And they prop it up with censorship, with lies, by destroying people politically, by making sure we can't be heard, because they want people to think if we don't do this, if they say anything about it at all, then the system collapses, then you get a depression, which we're going to get anyway. They cannot, it's not sustainable. This cannot continue. And meanwhile,
they can't continue to just print money, can they? They can't continue to do this. I mean, they have been doing it for 10 days. I think they've been putting it into the repo markets, you call it in America. The Fed has been, and this is for bank-to-bank lending. This is and basically what a repo market is for those. I'm going to try and explain this, Margaret. Okay. I don't know whether I'm right. Maybe if you know more, you can. A repo market, that basically, if you imagine a bank like at the close of business. Sometimes at the close of business, they need a loan because they're not getting to get anything coming in until the next day. It's like they get a loan from this repo market. It's like a fund that's kept, and it's at a stupid rate, like 0.001%, because they only need the loan for like 12 hours. Well, in November, banks started going to this fund, trying to get a loan overnight, and there was no money there. So the Fed was having to stick billions in almost every day. They were putting 50 billion in, 10 billion down, because there's so many leaks in the economic system. You pour it in at the top and it just goes straight into the rich person's pocket. There's a guy called Mark Blythe. I don't know whether you're aware of him, and he talks about how we bailed out the bankers in the 2008 financial crash, and he says basically what it is, it's the equivalent of needing to fill up your kettle with water. And instead of going over and to the sink and turning the tap on and putting it in the people's pockets and bailing the people out because that's who needs it, because they'll spend it in the economy and that's what will grow the economy. Instead of doing that and filling up the kettle that way, what you've decided to do is to get a fireman's high pressure hose, jam it through the letterbox, turn it on full, and hope that somehow some will end up in the kitchen in that kettle where it's needed to be. And of course it doesn't. What happens is, the derivatives markets and all these other markets swallow it up, and it all ends up going to the bankers in bonuses, and none of us see any of the benefit of it. They can't just keep doing this. Something's going to have to break. What do you think? Well, do you think this virus is going to be the thing that actually brings it all down?
It could be. It could be. I mean, we're seeing. The damage done to the economy is already significant. Venues, Broadway is dark. No Broadway shows. I mean, this is a multi-million-dollar revenue generator for New York City. No Broadway shows. Businesses closing. Conferences canceled. airlines eliminating flights because they don't have enough passengers, Amtrak not having enough passengers, people not going to work, kids not in school, so that means their parents are home instead of at work. All of the people not being able to buy after all this panic buying, what does that do to the retailers? Now you can't, there's things you can't get anymore because of all the panic. So the implications are very far reaching. And what I hope happens is that people start to see how we've been lied to in so many different ways. We aren't just lied to about how many test kits there are in the United States, but it's part of it shows the failure of our system. And that's why they don't tell you how China succeeded in stopping the virus. Yeah. They just tell you it's authoritarian and they wouldn't let people leave their houses, but they don't tell you. In America, China built new hospitals in a week.
Yeah,
that would not happen here.
2 1,000-bed hospitals in a week. That is incredible. I mean, obviously, you know, you could say, oh, they've got no human rights. It's amazing what you can do when you got new human rights. If you really think you've got human rights, go down to Belmarsh Prison. There's a guy called Julian Assange down there. Go and ask him about his human rights. See if the point I'm trying to make is, when push comes to shove, you don't have human rights. They can take it away from you, and they will do it in this country. And what China did by shutting things down like that, and I mean, they have the amount of new cases they're having per day now is less than us, I think.
Oh, it is, yeah, absolutely. They were the epicenter of the crisis, but it took them a while to realize what was happening. But once they did, they were able to attack it, and it tells you what about their system is superior. And instead of talking about their lack of human rights and their dictators, we should be talking about what they do that we need to do.
Yeah.
But that's why they have to keep lying, because they can't have us questioning the way our systems work and pointing to another country that they don't like and us saying something positive.
Just before the last thing, unless there's anything else you want to talk about, Margaret, the last thing I want to talk to you about is we've covered obviously the foreign policy, and we've covered Trump and you know the fact that we haven't got democracy, we've got oligarchies, and you know this coronavirus, the impending doom of the stock market, the fact that all people around the world are now, you know, eyes are wide open as to what John White, the journalist over here, my buddy, he says that Trump is like the monster with the mask removed. He says that, you know, everybody can now see what America's foreign policy is around the world and what they're doing, because he's just telling it. He's not lying about that. He's telling the truth about it. You know, and then we've got, you know, the people in the DNC going against Bernie Sanders because he wants to give people healthcare and propping somebody up who's got dementia to run against Trump and whatever. It is absolutely, it's ridiculous. It reminds me of the last hours of Caligula. You know how they say Caligula, he wanted to put a horse in as one of his senators or something like that. That was the rumor anyway. That's the fable. This has got to such a degree now where it's such nonsense. I liken it to the end of the film Terminator 2. I don't know whether you've seen it.
I don't remember the ending, though.
Arnie comes up on his and he says the immortal line, "Hasta la vista, baby," and he fires the shot at the T-1000. It gets split in half, and then he falls off into the vat of oil. And as he falls off into this vat of molten lava, you can see all the faces of all the people that he's killed and all the nastiness that he's done. It feels to me like this is the world right now, and we're seeing all the nastiness and all the nonsense. Is this the end of the empire we're looking at?
I hope so. But I don't say that happily, because it's not going to end quietly. They're not going to go quietly, and a lot of people are going to suffer. But it does have to end, and they're not going to end it voluntarily. They're not going to say, you know what, we're wrong. We're going to change the way we do things. That's not going to.
They're going to fight all the way, and they've got big bombs.
They're going to fight all the way, but I don't see a way out. I don't want to see World War III, but we could. But yes, it is ending. It's not sustainable. And we're in for interesting times.
We're in for interesting times. We're in for difficult times as well, Margaret. And I'm really happy that people like you are there actually some sensible spin on it, and we need more people like you. Is there anything else you want to talk about while I've got you?
There is. There's one more thing. My book.
Oh, of course, yes.
A history book. Put it up to my head.
Prejudential.
Prejudential Black America and the Presidents. And it's a collection of essays, 45, one dedicated to each president, and analyzing their relationships with and treatment of Black people. And it shows it's interesting, the beginnings of this country were rotten. Settler colonial state, genocide of the indigenous people, chattel slavery. And I believe that those things are impacting us today. So I talk about each president, and then of course we can't be surprised about anything that's happening now. But I'm biased, of course. I think everybody should read it. You can get it online. It's published by Steerforth Press, or you can get it on Amazon.
I'll leave a link below when I drop this video, Margaret. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you. And I look forward to speaking to you again. Thanks, Margaret Kimberley.
I hope so. Thanks.